When the transmission arrived at the United Terran Council, silence fell across the chamber. The image was raw and grainy, a live feed from the frontier colony of New Dresden. Buildings burned, their skeletal remains casting long shadows against the soil of a once thriving world. The screams had stopped hours ago. The attackers had left nothing living behind. The invaders called themselves the Althean Collective, one of the countless alien civilizations that had once regarded humanity as the galaxy's curious newcomer. They believed Earth's people were too sentimental, too bound by treaties and notions of morality. They struck without warning, annihilating 2 million settlers who had trusted the peace accords signed under the banner of unity. As the feed ended, the Council's chamber remained still. The representatives from Mars, Europa, and Luna sat frozen. The chairperson, a tall man with eyes dark as the void, finally rose. "They think we will grieve," he said, voice steady but cold. "They think we will mourn quietly." He looked across the chamber, and every delegate felt the weight of centuries pressing down. "But now," he said, "we stop being civilized." Earth had long prided itself on restraint. The species that once warred with itself for millennia had, through struggle and exhaustion, sworn off total destruction. But restraint was a luxury born of peace, and peace had just been murdered. The reaction began within hours. Civilian industries were nationalized, orbital shipyards reignited, and the once dormant Terran defense network roared back to life. The old war engines, sealed away beneath the lunar crust, were brought out of stasis. Machines that had not seen sunlight since the last global war awoke under human hands once more. Across the solar system, humanity remembered what it was. On the dark side of Mars, massive reactors were reactivated, their magnetic cores pulsing with the first new energy signatures in decades. In Earth's orbit, the fleet yards began to sing, the sound of hammers and plasma welders echoing through the void as new ships were born from molten steel. The galaxy watched in apprehension. The Althean had expected condemnation, not retaliation. To them, humanity was predictable, a race of diplomats, explorers, and traders. They didn't know the history buried beneath Earth's oceans, in its ruins and battlefields, in the memories of a people who had survived everything from fire to extinction. When the first Terran fleet departed, it was not called a response force. It was called a reclamation. The flagship Resolute Dawn carried no banners, no symbols of peace. It bore only the old Earth sigil, an iron circle enclosing a single torch. Its fleet spread like a tide across the stars, each ship carrying the names of lost colonies etched upon its hull. Every crew member wore a black band on their arm, not as a mark of mourning but of promise. The Althean learned quickly that humanity's vengeance was not loud. It was precise, deliberate, and relentless. They expected an armada to strike their homeworlds immediately. Instead, Earth's fleets dismantled the collective piece by piece. Trade hubs vanished. Weapon depots ignited under orbital bombardment. Drone factories went dark. Entire Althean fleets found themselves cut off, their communication networks shredded by human signal disruptors. And when the Terrans finally spoke through the interstellar channels, it was not with rage, but with clarity. "You sought to remind us of what we once were," said the Fleet Marshal of Earth. "You succeeded." The Althean tried negotiation. They offered reparations, peace terms, even submission. But humanity did not answer their calls. For the first time in centuries, Earth spoke only through its fleets. On the colony world of Ryle Prime, an Althean governor looked up one night to see a second moon rising. It wasn't a celestial body, it was the Terran dreadnought Judgment. Without a word, it unleashed its payload. The surface turned to glass in seconds. The message was clear: no treaties, no mercy. Throughout the galaxy, other civilizations watched in disbelief. The Solari Republic convened an emergency summit, calling for intervention. The Yovran consulate urged restraint. Even the enigmatic Varn sent envoys pleading for moderation. But none dared to interfere. They had seen the Terran fleets move, silent, unyielding, unstoppable. Everywhere the Althean once ruled, black ships now orbited. Human banners hung from alien cities, their crimson sigils stark against the silver spires. The occupation was efficient, not cruel. Civilians were fed, infrastructure repaired, and order restored, but always under the watchful eyes of Terran Marines, who spoke little and obeyed only the command from Earth. Never forget, in the great city of Meridian on Earth, A memorial stood where the council had once convened. Beneath its foundation rested the ashes of New Dresden's colonists. Visitors came from across the system to see it. A single inscription was carved upon the black stone. We gave peace to the stars. They gave us war. So we reminded them who we are. Generations later, historians would argue whether humanity's reaction was justified. Some would call it vengeance, others survival. But to those who lived through it, there was no question. They remembered the days after the massacre, the silence of the news feeds, the weeping of families who received no remains, only data fragments. They remembered the moment when Earth's light changed from gold to red, the dawn when factories that had been silent for a century burned again, and they remembered the phrase that united them all. Now we stop being civilized. The phrase wasn't born from anger, it was born from clarity. Civilization had given humanity beauty, art, and understanding. But beneath all that, buried in their bones, was something older. The will to endure, the refusal to kneel, the certainty that survival was not granted by treaties but earned in blood and steel. The Althean homeworld fell 8 months later. The final broadcast from the system was a simple message. Operation Eclipse complete. All resistance neutralized. The transmission cut and the fleet vanished into the void. When the dust settled, humanity did not conquer the galaxy. They rebuilt it. The surviving Althean were offered sanctuary under Terran protection. No enslavement, no destruction, only obedience to the new order. The same council that once spoke softly now spoke with the authority of inevitability. We will not rule, the chairperson declared, but we will ensure that no one forgets what happens when civilization is mistaken for weakness. Decades later, children born under alien suns studied Earth's history as required education. They learned of the ancient wars, of the rise from ashes, of a people who had reached for peace and found only betrayal. They learned that civilization is a choice, and that humans could choose otherwise if driven to it. And somewhere in the quiet corridors of the resolute dawn, an old officer walked alone. The stars stretched beyond the viewport, endless and silent. He placed his hand on the hull where the names of New Dresden's dead were engraved. "We were peaceful," he murmured. "We wanted to build, but you taught us to remember." He turned toward the stars, the reflection of Earth faint in the distance. So we remembered, and the galaxy, still whispering in the shadow of Terran fleets, never forgot. From that day onward, every species in the Milky Way carried a simple truth in their hearts. Do not provoke Earth, because behind their diplomacy, their culture, their art, and their warmth, lies the ancient resolve of a species that once survived its own extinction. They do not start wars, but once started, they end them. That was the day humanity shed its civility, not in hatred, but in remembrance. The day they reminded the galaxy that civilization was never their shield. It was their restraint. And restraint, once broken, left nothing standing in their path. From the ashes of New Dresden to the edges of the spiral arm, a legend spread. A story of a world that had wept once and vowed never again. Of a species that turned grief into steel and silence into thunder. And though centuries would pass and peace would return, that phrase would echo through every academy, every command deck, every human heart. Now we stop being civilized, for in those 5 words, the galaxy learned the truest face of mankind.